This episode brought to you by Discovery Bank. Ready to experience the future of banking now? Get on board. Discovery Bank Limited is an authorized FSP 48657. T's and C's apply. So, you think you want to be a CEO?
CEO's role is to lead in an organization. A complex network of hierarchy, skills, regulators, customers, stakeholders. The research shows that networks work well on positive signals.
The power, the status, the money.
Attitude is important, but this is not about optimism, the idea of being, happy and running down the street with a smile on your face and things will work out, no matter what. If you got that predisposition, I'm very happy for you.
Is it all it's cracked up to be?
That's why big corporations dull talent, because the structure of remuneration pay is a function of bonuses, and bonuses are set on goals, and I believe people, correctly so, won't set stretch goals when they're getting paid on it. It's not rational.
Adrian Gore is the founder and chief executive of Discovery, the South African insurer which owns Vitality Health in the United Kingdom and the Vitality Rewards program, which is attached to 18 insurers across 36 markets. The biggest, the United States, with markets in Asia, Africa, Europe, the UAE, Japan, China, and in Latin America as well. It has huge roots across the globe. Adrian Gore started Discovery at a time of deep political uncertainty, faced being shut down by his regulator at short notice one Christmas Eve, survived that, tried and failed to take on insurers in the United States head on, and in the process built a best-in-class global enterprise. Well, the recent release of his book, The Four Principles, charts how it happened and provides a framework for leaders to think about how they might grow their enterprises in a deeply uncertain world. I'm Bruce Whitfield. I've been interrogating leaders and distilling their lessons for others for 25 years. So, Adrian Gore, what does it take to be a CEO?
First, I think being a CEO is a privilege. It really is. I think to lead people and to lead a business is a privilege. I'm not sure what it takes, to your question. As a founder, I've only been the CEO, but I think what it takes to be a good CEO, I think is purpose, because I think leading people towards a purpose or a business towards a purpose makes it authentic. It makes the journey authentic, and I think makes the leadership authentic. So, there are all kinds of skills and there are all kinds of issues in it, but, I think being a great CEO is someone in the tail, which is one of my principles, frankly. So, you ask a very good question. I'm not sure I have a crisp answer. I think it's contextual. But to an extent, I think anyone can lead. That's my hypothesis.
Get to the four principles in a moment. Are they a tidy retrofit of what it's taken 35 years to build, or were they founding principles of what Discovery would become?
They are, they're certainly founding principles, but they evolved over the journey of the organization. They started out as convictions of the team. And, the fundamental issue was we've been a fairly capital light business. It's been a business built on people. We made a small acquisition in the UK, but the business has organically grown. And so the entire business has been about how do we attract the best people, how do we bring out the best in them. And therefore, from the get-go, it was about purpose, values, and this obsession with, what makes people great. And therefore, to your question, it is foundational in trying to understand how to bring out the best in people. So at a very early stage, these four principles did form. I think we've, over the decades, have been able to articulate them better, back them up with research, and therefore it's not a retrofitted issue, quite the opposite. It's almost the other way around. It's a proof of hunches initially with more science, so to speak.
I recall so often at the Discovery Leadership Summit, you'd have world names, Dan Ariely, Daniel Kahneman, and others who would do their presentation on stage, and an audience of 3,000 or 4,000 people would be with their jaws on the floor, and very quietly you would remove them from the stage and then take them, I think, into executive boardrooms to truly interrogate them on what they had just spoken about on stage, what they'd written about, what they'd studied all their lives. And that, I think, was critical in the building blocks of discovery over the last, 35 years.
That's absolutely true. Just start with the question we've been trying to answer, and I think that's the leadership summit, is what makes some people have massive impact as leaders and others with the same abilities do very little. And in fact, the other way around, you have people with amazing talents who do nothing. What is it about that? And to an extent, your point is spot on. I think I've had the privilege of working with incredibly smart people in the organization. We're an actuarial, clinical, technology business, data business, and we've worked, as you say, with some of the top leaders in the world. So that set of observations and that set of insights, and I think the behavioral economics basis of the business, mixing that with actuarial science, kind of a financial mix with behavioral understanding, has given us an interest as an organization into these very things. So you're right. I think the privilege of those areas of exposure has set us as a team on a journey to try and understand this stuff. And that kind of is what is being condensed to an extent.
Story I'd not heard previously, and I just loved it because you talk about it in the book. You're a young actuary at Liberty. You've been given this job. You're pushing hard to get noticed within Liberty. It's an old school insurance company. You arrive in product development and you decide, this is my home. This is my happy place. I am not moving from product development. And of course, lots of large corporates, and I'm sure you do it as well, rotate people through departments so you get a good feel for the business. You get a broad overview as a promising young executive. And then at the end of that process, you choose. Early on in the process, you say, I'm not moving from product development. It got so bad that they even moved your desk away from product development to try and force you to move, and you simply refused. Why was it at that moment, age 25-ish, that you dug your heels in?
I had a deep conviction that was the way, not to the top hierarchically, but it was, I think R&D and innovation is at the front line of strategy. And that gave me an exposure to the people that were driving the business. And I was inspired by the idea of product development. In fact, my colleague Barry Schwartzberg, he was there before me. And he got me to Liberty as a young bursary student by saying, there's this new department called product development. I had this hunch around that was a way to exposure at a very young age. And to an extent, I say to some of the people I mentor here in our organization, I shouldn't say it as a CEO because there's structure and whatever, but as an individual, you've got to hustle, you've got to have agency. There are rules and there's structures, but if you want to get ahead, you do have to put your foot down. You know what I'm saying to you? I think that's one of the issues, and I think that is an important issue. So I hope I didn't tell the story in any arrogant way. It wasn't just product development. I think I had agency at that stage, which I think is important when you're young. You've got to feel that you can make decisions. You're not going to get pushed around, so to speak. It doesn't mitigate from the point you made. Having broad experience is a wonderful asset, but there's a trade-off.
I wonder if you seek out, and forgive me for using this term, but I like it, is quite a precocious approach. Here you are, a youngster in a top-down, top-heavy organization, and you go, no, I found my happy place, and I could be more valuable here to you than anywhere else. I am staying, and I wonder if that's a characteristic you look for in other promising young people.
I think it is, but I don't think it's a precocious, nothing noble about me. I'm not saying I wasn't, but I hope my approach wasn't precocious. It was intellectual. It was an argument. I'm going to add more value here. It wasn't a precociousness. But I do think that you've got to stand your ground intellectually. I think you must have deep conviction, deep values, and you need to live by them. But at the same time, respect and hierarchy is a good thing. But I think great organizations have a natural hierarchy that plays to people that are playing to their strengths. I don't think you want artificial hierarchy where people are put in boxes and they play out their role. I think that's problematic. I encourage people not to do that.
I think that's one of the biggest changes in business in the last 35 years since Discovery began, is that hierarchy has become truly merit-based in terms of ideas rising rather than people's status rising in organizations. Certainly that's how I believe that you've flipped the switch on that from a Discovery point of view.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, I think when you start out a business, an institutional business, there's some ego about you building this big institution and I'm in charge and whatever, but that is a counterfeit leadership attribute. I kind of figured out early on that getting the best people and bringing out the best in them, it would have to be egalitarian. not for the sake of chaos, but for the sake of people feeling a sense of agency. It would be purpose-based, where that is really the hierarchy, ability, merit, and the ability to get us to a purpose. And I think that was an epiphany for me, and I have a deep conviction about great people, all people, really bring out the best in them. You cannot give them, extrinsic motivation, define who they are, put them in a box. I think that's poor leadership. So I agree with you. I think things have changed dramatically for the better. I think it's wonderful.
Take me through the principles then. And you start off, and your first principle is the principle of disciplined optimism. And Melinda French, the former Mrs. Melinda French Gates, says optimism is not a belief that things will be better. It's the belief that we can make things better. And then you add another layer to it, and you go to disciplined optimism. That, I think, makes it exponentially more powerful. What's the difference between optimism and disciplined optimism? Because people can often confuse the two.
Well, just to make one point about the principles, I mean, Bruce, there are 4 of them, and they are principles because they're fundamental and they are measurable and demonstrable. So they're not just concepts. They're something that we have worked hard on, and we've worked hard to prove them and their effect on impact. Disciplined optimism is a fundamental issue. Attitude is important, but this is not about optimism, the idea of being, happy and running down the street with a smile on your face and things will work out, no matter what. If you've got that predisposition, I'm very happy for you, and that's a great thing. This is more about the issue, and this is what the book is based on, the principles are based on, is that we are miscoded, in a way that's destructive for our impact. So one of the biggest things in the book, it talks about how we evolved. And the fact is that we evolved over 3 million years as hunter-gatherers. But the key issue is that we evolved in a time where threats were physical, right? We were potentially eaten by lions, falling off mountains. And in fact, if you look at the history, the history of the fossils that we've found, they've all been killed in violent ways. So we lived in a violent environment. Go to the game reserve now, into the bush. You'll see how animals are seeking danger. That's how they survive, So the point I made in, getting this book out is there were very optimistic people who didn't care about risk. They've been eaten. We are the children, right, of people that were concerned about risk, The other data point that I found interesting is, 50% of children died at a young age. So probably every mother experienced the loss of a child, which means that we probably lived in times where looking for danger around every corner is kind of how we survived. So we are the survivors of that process. So we were coded to seek danger. We're coded to seek negative signals. And the problem is the world we're in now has completely evolved. We're in cities, not clans, and we're in an environment where threats are not physical. They're threats of systems failing. Companies, governance, governments, healthcare systems we deal with, it's failures of systems. And therefore what we find in ourselves is that our fundamental view, our fundamental coding in the environment, as if we lead or whatever we do, is to seek out negative signals. But it turns out that today, to lead effectively or to create opportunity is the ability to seek the positive. And that's the issue of disciplined optimism. It's not about being optimistic. It's not about not being worried about risk. It's about the discipline of seeking positive signals because we are not coded for it. The research we show in the book is that if there are 100 stimuli ahead of us and 50 are negative and 50 are positive, we see all the negatives, but we only see half of the positives. And success today and impact today is about seeking the positive, seeing opportunities, and then importantly, being able to execute on them. And you come back to a CEO's role. A CEO's role is to lead in an organization, a complex network of hierarchy, skills, regulators, customers, stakeholders. The research shows that networks work well on positive signals. You get better participation, you get better diffusion of information, you get better collaboration. So the point is that, leading and doing things effectively is about spotting opportunity and executing on it. The negative stuff and the risks, I can promise you, if you compare you and I, we're probably very differently coded about this stuff. We both will identify the same risks. But winning here is about the ability to identify the positive opportunities. And that's why we call it disciplined optimism. It's not naive optimism. It's about the discipline, the tactic of finding the positive.
And it's such an important differentiator because having observed you for many of the 35 years and many other leaders who have built phenomenal businesses in one of the toughest business environments on earth, a very hostile business environment, it's very easy to sit back and say, I'm going to wait for the environment to change. I'm going to wait for things to become more certain. As the world has become increasingly uncertain, the skills that I think South African leaders have learned during this time particularly over the entire time of your history as confidence has ebbed and flowed, those skills are actually fundamental to coping in the present day where uncertainty is off the charts.
It is absolutely fundamental. I think leading in times of uncertainty is always about knowing the risks, being realistic about them. But again, I say to you that I think that we coded for, but it's about that ability to spot, what opportunities are present. One of the things that I talk about in the book is the complexity of the Eskom problem, of the electricity failure and the power failure, and how business became involved. And Bruce, I believe we only managed to get that involvement in a coordinated way when we kind of focused on the positive. How can we help? We all signed a pledge as CEOs about our belief in the potential of the country. The reality was dire without power, but the potential was there. And I can tell you, in that network of business leaders, government, SOEs, that kind of signaling changed the entire issue from different ideologies and mistrust to one of, we've got a common problem here. I'm sure we can solve it. And that process led to success. It's one of the best examples of how networks and leadership work. When you seed it with positive feedback loops, you feed it with purpose, you get a different result. So, your question's spot on. In a complex environment where there's hope and despair I can share with you. You've got the same war stories. You don't need help for that. But the ability to spot the positive stuff, what's the opportunity, and the ability to execute through a very complicated network. And a CEO is in a complex network. You've got to do that.
Feedback loops are so interesting because it's very easy to be negative. It's very easy to seek out the negatives because you find common cause with many people. And you talk about it being far more intellectually rigorous, even at the pain of being criticized, at the pain of being laughed at sometimes for this sunny optimism view, which you were criticized for in the early days of the Eskom turnaround. And you talk about it being, actually, it's far more complex and far more difficult to be optimistic in a world where it's so easy to go into the declinist frame of mind. It takes true character, I believe, to stand up and say, it doesn't have to be this way.
Yes, as you say, we go back a long way on this stuff. We've traveled the journey together. I mean, the truth of it is, I've often been called a fool. They roll me out as a naive optimist. And I've tried my best to get across the idea that these are intellectual issues. They're not emotional issues. But I'm not sure it takes character, because I think I've seen it, that when you put something positive on the table, people take to it. Even if they criticize the source of it, it changes the hue and the cadence of the discussion. It's easy to knock things and to be cynical. It is harder to focus on the positive. But if you do get on the table, it tends to roll. And, something I keep having a battle with people over is kind of attitude drives fundamentals, not the other way around. You end up with this continual battle where people say, well, let's get things right. Then we can tell people that things are going well. It's the other way around. Give people a sense of what the potential is, and the fundamentals tend to change. I mean, that's the hope of the book. I believe if leadership was based on focusing on the positive, I think that the potential of that as a collective, forget about individual business performance, but as a collective would be unbelievable. I think economic growth in our country would be liberated. I mean, that's what we're focusing on. I think this business-government partnership, we're going into the third phase now. We're launching that in 2 weeks' time. It's again, based on the potential of what we can do. So I think as a leader in a market where you're competing, this is a relative competitive issue. So therefore, if you do it better than others, I think it gets you ahead. But as a collective, if we all did that, I think the effect on people as a collective would be amazing. So it's held back by this ridiculous, cognitive error that pessimism is realism, pessimism is sophistication. Pessimism is primitive. It's our primitive coding. Seeking the positive is a sophisticated recoding. So that's one of the biggest pleas of my book, is to change that prejudice.
It was a Nobel Prize-winning economist called Robert Shiller, 2019, came out with a book in which he spoke precisely about this. And it was about the fact that narrative leads outcomes. And he was talking about how social media trends became fact over time because people simply believe it. If you repeat matters often enough, other people then repeat them back to you. You start to believe them. And that works particularly well in declinist environments. And I once asked him, Teto Nyati, the Eskom chairman, who you will know very well, I said to him, what was the one thing at Eskom that changed that made the turnaround possible. And we threw it around a bit. And ultimately, I've distilled it down, and he agreed. It was reinvigorating the self-belief of people within Eskom that they could do it. South Africans had given up on Eskom. Eskom had given up on itself. Government had given up on Eskom and itself to find solutions. And it was only when you brought in some fresh thinking into it and said, actually, this is possible. It's technically possible. There's some legislative things that need to change, and there's some process things to change, and people that need to change. Yet it can be done. And it took that outside thinking to bring it inside to go, it's possible. And then suddenly people woke up to the fact that, and 380, 90 days later, there has been no load shedding.
Absolutely. I think the Eskom, and I think the process within Eskom, as you say, is a great example of that. Their partnership worked with government, with Eskom. It was a collective that did so well. But I agree fully with you. Narrative is causal, not the other way around. And it's critical. But again, it's not about naivety. It is about spotting intellectually the opportunity and the reality of what you have to do to get there. It's not and this is where I think the kind of prejudice comes in. It's not about optimism. It's about the tactic of spotting positive signals.
Then your principle number 2 is focused urgency. And I remember a story you told so beautifully at the launch of my second book, which was called Genius, which was exploring South Africans who'd taken big ideas global. And you told a story of how you were standing on Clifton Beach, aged about 27, your eldest daughter on your hip, obviously paying full attention to your daughter, but coming to the realization in that moment that you were running out of time. Now, 27, the vast majority of us haven't even got out of the starting blocks yet, but you were already working with an end in mind, saying, if I'm going to have true impact in this world, I need to buck up and speed up. And I guess that was one of the catalysts for your decision to leave Liberty, to go to Laurie de Bernard at First Rand R&B at the time and say, you've got an insurance license, allow me to fill it for you. And Discovery was born as a result of that. That urgency that I think has encapsulated you probably from day one.
Yeah, I don't quite know why that's the case. And I think there's a lot of research that shows success is about urgency, about implicitly understanding the shortness of time. I had that sense of urgency, So even in that product development anecdote you spoke about earlier, I was 22 or 23 at the time. I kind of knew I don't have time to spend 9 months in the actual evaluation department. I've got to stay here, So I don't know what, that is inside me. It's an impatience or whatever. But I mean, again, it's one of the issues that I see people who truly believe that they've got greatness in them, and I believe that to be true. I agree with them. But who kind of just will never let it out there because they think time is forever. They think at some point they're going to have their big moment. And, over my career, talking to inductees and whatever, has always been to tell them that life is very short. And principle 2 is focused urgency actually is the research around exactly that time is not linear. Time accelerates, time is logarithmic. And, trying to explain this idea of the rule of 20%. And so it's a fundamental issue. You can have all the positivity, all the ideas, but if you're going too slowly, you're going to be dead before they play out, I can assure you. And that's what the book explains in principle 2. It's really, it's not urgency for the sake of it. It's focused on the purpose you're trying to achieve, whether it's building a business, being a great parent, changing the country, running for president, wherever it is that you think is important, you don't have time, So, if I can expand on that slightly, I mean, just it's interesting that we all know that time is not linear. We know from Einstein, time is a function of gravity and velocity. And, if you're a quantum physics individual, you know all that stuff. But we assume in our own lives, time is every year counts the same. But as we get older, the years are a smaller proportion of our lives. So the years feel shorter as you get older. And this is kind of the perception theory of time, which I strongly believe and I use in the book. That, if you're 40, you think you've halfway through your life, 40 over 80. But if you're 40, on my scale, the first year counts 100 or 1. The second year counts a half, which is 50% of your life. The 40th year counts 1 over 40. So when you redo that simple arithmetic, you find you're 85% through your life. And the reality here is that if you do that, you break your life into education, into work, and into retirement. You find the work piece from 25 to age 65 is only 20% of your life. No one disagrees when I tell them that because everyone knows the years are getting faster and faster. No one I know has ever said to me, oh, the years are slowing down. You think about when you're a child, how long a year was. So getting people to understand that time is short, that 20% impact zone that's your time, and that comes back to this question of why is it that people with education and privilege and all that do nothing? Often the 20% impact area, they just take too slowly. So it's quite a tragic principle because it's actually existential. You can't change your pathway through time. That's it. That's how you experience time. I can tell you I feel it. Now I can feel years are going by unbelievably. I had a vitality medical yesterday. So my office tells me you've got to fast, you've got to have your bloods. So I said, but I had it a few months ago. I said, no, it was a year ago. I said, there's no way. I'm actually doing an investigation. I don't believe it. But if it's true, and I'm sure it's true, the year has gone like this. It is horrific, So, that's just how it is. So principle 2 is about this issue of focused urgency. You don't have time. You need to focus it carefully, and a bunch of remedies to make it more effective. But it's a fundamental principle of impact.
How do you sustain that, though, over an extended period of time? Because the one very clear characteristic, a standout characteristic of discovery, is this persistent sense of urgency. And we'll extrapolate a little bit on that in the next principle, which is on declared goals. But how do you keep urgency in a business for 35 years? Because that's an awfully long time to keep motivating, to keep driving, to keep pushing, to embed it in a culture of an organization where it's normal, where next week's not good enough, it's got to be today.
Look, I think there are a few things we've used to do that. We use a 90-day cycle. So we use long-term planning, obviously, capital planning, etc. We use a 90-day cycle of real change. I mean, my style of leadership, I think our team as well, is one of really pushing hard to get to deadlines. In our businesses, we set every year there's a launch, a discovery launch. In the UK, we do the same thing. And that cycle creates an urgency. And, to your point about sustaining it, Bruce, to energy, I find that progress and innovation is very inspiring. If you're running a business, trying to just eke out your return on capital from, I dealt with a CEO of a large insurance group. His plan was to take his return on capital from 12.3 to 12.8. To be fair, it's not easy to do on an asset base of $1 trillion or whatever. But the point is, I don't believe that's an inspiring purpose. So that sense of urgency around a purpose that is noble creates a sustaining energy. It's not just that you've got that sense of urgency, but that you don't tire from it. You don't tire from the pace. It's actually the other way around. There's more and more things that you're doing. Innovation begets innovation, and it's inspiring.
From the start, the ambition was clear: to build a bank that could be more than a bank. One that rewards better decisions, connects the ecosystems that shape your life, and gets smarter the more you engage. That ambition is now a reality. With Discovery Bank, your entire financial life comes together in one intelligent platform, accessed through a single app. It understands your behavior, works harder for you over time, and helps you build your financial future with confidence. Discovery Bank, the future of banking. Now.
That's the importance then of principle number 3, which is declared goals. Setting a goal, a stretch goal, not just I would like to have extra breakfast once a week. It's a serious, optimistic, demanding goal that we need to reach this level, launch this product, this innovation by a certain date. And I'm guessing you were in the early stages of writing the book when you put out into the public domain that you wanted to, at age, I'm not going to say the age, you're going to say the age because I don't want to get it wrong, but at a more advanced age, that you were going to do a 5-minute mile. And you were a long way away from a 5-minute mile, even though you are incredibly active, run a huge amount and exercise ferociously. You set that as a public declared goal. Explain the thinking.
The issue is, you're right about an organization, but this principle is about individual impact and success and leadership. And the point here is that this is work of Daniel Kahneman. It's Nobel Prize winning work, that we are motivated by potential loss more so than potential gain. It's linked to the negative signals. Loss means more to us than gain, right? That's how we evolve. That's why we're here. And the multiplier from the work done is a 2 times multiple. So in other words, we are twice as scared of a loss as we are of a potential gain, right? They show that golfers, there's one study in the book, and I've spoke about this on the stage. I find it fascinating that the best in the world golfers putt much better for a par than for a birdie, because a par is a potential loss if you miss it, and a bird is a potential gain. The loss of a par means more. So no matter how talented you are, you cannot avoid the invisible hand of loss aversion. It's there. So as individuals, when you set a goal and it's declared, and that's why we called it declared goals. I don't mean declared necessarily, on your show. It might be to your family or whatever, but it's a goal that's out there. You've put it out there. You've got something to lose. As soon as you've got a goal, you've got something to lose. And, when I speak to people, they tell me when you're at school or, you've got to get certain marks in matric to get into university. You've got to be a certain speed to get in the track team, what it is. But declared goals are imposed on you. But my experience, individuals in that 20% of time to make an impact don't set goals. They come out of school with 10 A's and they peak in matric kind of thing, and they get the most unbelievable education from university if they're lucky enough. But then they go through life without real stretch goals. So it is a fundamental issue. You've got to evoke that invisible hand of loss aversion. The 5-minute mile actually started out interestingly as a vitality idea, how we would demonstrate to people following me on LinkedIn, the idea of fitness and physical activity. Was interesting, though, this loss aversion. As I put it out there, I realized I've got something to lose here. I had the best coach possible. I had the best science possible. As you said, I was 58. I wasn't capable. I got to like 5:35 in Joburg, and I thought I could do faster in Cape Town. The coach said, don't bother going to a stadium. Go on the road with a 200 kilometer an hour wind behind you. Maybe that's your best chance. You know what I mean? But the point is, I tore a calf muscle and failed, and I would have failed anyway. I don't have the ability. But the amazing thing is the drive towards it, that invisible hand of loss aversion. I was up in the morning training twice a day while running Discovery. You know what I mean? I found the time, I found the energy, that goal inspired me, and my running has never been the same. It's a narrow issue. But I tell you, it was interesting. It was on LinkedIn. We had, 1 million hits or whatever. We had people talking about goals, about cancer sufferers, what they're trying to do. It was the most inspiring process. So a declared goal is transformational, and it's not a difficult thing to do. But the point is, even if you miss it, it's a fantastic thing to do.
If you set a low bar for yourself and you achieve that bar, you can pat yourself on the head and tell yourself you're wonderful. By setting a stretch goal, even if it's not achieved, you go way beyond the low bar and considerably closer to a far more advanced state than you would ever have done had you not done it.
Yeah, and this is one of my observations in the book, and something I care deeply about, is that's why big corporations dull talent inside them, because the structure of remuneration, pay, is a function of bonuses, and bonuses are set on goals. And I believe people, correctly so, won't set stretch goals when they're getting paid on it. It's not rational. So kind of separating pay from goals, I'm not saying you need to have variable pay and all of that, but the point is, I think intrinsic motivation about bigger goals and just goals in the office, so to speak, are critical. You've got to set things that you can fail at, So the book is trying to inspire goals beyond, just setting, day-to-day work goals. It's about really something more substantial, more intrinsic that matter to you, that aren't imposed on you by a corporation, but really matter to you. And whatever that may be, I think that's a critical issue. It shouldn't be, in my view, it shouldn't be so far out that it's unrealistic, and it shouldn't be so easy that you're getting your pat yourself on the back.
It's also been fundamental to Discovery as well, because I've been backstage with executives who are going to go to those big annual launches you talk about, and they've been working, burning the midnight oil in the run-up to this big launch to ensure that they've got something new to offer your advisor community, for example, who are looking for something new because they need an excuse to go and talk to their clients. So there is real pressure, and that stated goals, we will give you something new at the next announcement, forces a particular behavior within the organization. And it works, and has worked so far.
It does work. And I think why it works is because I don't think the goal is defined. The context is defined. We're having a launch, but the scale of that is left to that leader, to an extent. And I think he or she then has a desire to really do something unexpected, something bigger. You know what I mean? So I think it's worked incredibly well. And I think all organizations, if they can create that set of goals, that urgency, they work together in a multiplicative way and impact.
Is there a risk, however? And again, I did read the book twice, and I read it fast twice on holiday, so my attention may not have been as sharp as it should have been. But you pushed yourself in your training for the 5-minute mile at a point beyond where your trainer had told you to go. So you've got the stated goal. You've then got some focused urgency because you're determined to reach this thing. And that's when you get injured. And I wonder if there is not a risk here that without absolute self-discipline, that these principles can go awry somewhat.
Obviously in the extreme they can, but the story of the 5-minute mile is it was remarkably successful. I failed spectacularly, but succeeded in changing my entire ability in the very field that I failed in. So I see it as a success, a remarkable success. Without that goal, I'm doing marathons now.
You gained, what, 40 seconds?
More over a mile. My marathon times now, I'm 62, are faster than in my 20s. It's bizarre. I learned more about how I could push myself. I never knew I had those limited, but I never knew I had those abilities, relative to my own capability. So, that injury is what's interesting, Bruce, one of the things in the book is you learn much more from success than from failure. It's another unpopular thing to say, but it's true. Failing and getting up is noble, and it teaches you a lot. But learning the recipes of success is more important. It comes back to the kind of issue of discipline, optimism, focusing on the positive, focusing on goals, and if you don't break them, they teach you. They really do.
And then you bring it all the way through to the fourth principle, and this is your truly happy space, because this is where the maths gets a bit intense, and this is the Pareto tale. The Pareto principle, in very simple terms, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, but 80% of outcomes come from 20% of the effort that you put in, broadly speaking. How does the Pareto tale then encapsulate the first three principles and then come this overarching principle in terms of very few decisions in our life are fundamental, and so make sure you make those big decisions really well?
Well, I read a paper that we have a cognitive error, and this is where this whole thing came from, that we believe the world is Gaussian. It's a bell shape. We taught that all the time. We like the uniformity. Systems have an average, and they distribute like that. But in a networked world of complexity, you get a tail forming. Nothing is distributed normally. So we taught that at school or university. You look at the heights of a male in a city, there's an average and there's tails or whatever. Independent things do that. But in things that are interconnected, you get a tail forming. In the stock market today, you find a few companies in the tail are 30% of the entire market cap of the entire world. You find a few people income-wise. I saw Elon Musk, I think what they quoted, his wealth is more than our tax take for the last decade or so. These ridiculous things in the tail. Many of them are offensive, understand that. In health claims, in a health insurance business, a small number of very sick people consume a lot of the bill. And if you statistically study this distribution, you find that you can never change it. It always forms, Bruce, the tail. So it's not like a nice to have. It is what it is. But the real observation here that kind of struck me is if you look at your own life, the impact on your life of certain actions and certain decisions, and you plotted them on a chart, you find that your own life is a highly networked system. I met you, we spoke about things together, that has an impact on how I did something else. I went down to see R&B with the idea of a license, a million things. I had a cup of tea for this, there was a decision. But if you plot those up, there are a million decisions that have no impact at all. I wore a blue shirt today, usually in white. Very nice, I don't think it's consequential at all. That's how it is. But there are a few things in the tail. I started Discovery one day. Our team thought of vitality. I speak about that in the book, The Epiphany in the Bath. I married my wife. Those are tail events. And those things drive the system. The beautiful thing about Pareto is the tail determines the average. Whereas in a uniform system, the whole distribution does. So if you accept, and I can tell you it to be true, if you accept that your life is a function of the tail is where your impact will be. So it's a great outcome because it means that it's never too late. It doesn't matter how bad things have gone for you. If you can get into the tail and drag it to the right, you will make an impact. And, when I was doing research for the book, again, this one, a really smart fellow in the UK was probing me on some of the science, and they said to me, that's very good, but how do you get into the tail? I accept that the tail is where it happens. But how you get into the tail is the first three principles. The attitudinal issue in seeking positive, the urgency in setting the goals, that gets you into the tail. I'm saying to you, that drive down to activate that license with R&B that became Discovery came from the very things that you spoke about. The urgency, the positivity, setting goals, not move, So the book is really about the first three principles leads to the tail. There's an appendix in the mathematics. It shows that the actual multiplier effect of the three principles is 24 times. We actually wanted to call the book, I thought at the start we'd have it as a multiplier, like 10,000 hours. But the 20 times multiple seems so ridiculous that it's not really plausible. But in fact, if you think about, certainly think in my life, what I would have done without those tail events, I can promise you is 1/20th of what it is. So I can see anecdotally that the 20 times multiplier is probably conservative. And that is the answer why privilege and IQ and all of that stuff, they're multipliers, but they're smaller than the recoding multipliers of these principles. And that's why I have such a deep conviction that if we can get these principles out, the impact on people can be significant.
I saw you on stage at the London launch, and one of your interrogators was a man called Matthew Syed, who's very well known in the UK, not particularly well known in South Africa, but he's written a whole bunch of books on performance. He himself, a table tennis player of national renown. Certainly he says so in his book Bounce. But he talks about how everybody's got innate talent at something. Everybody's really good at something, but it takes extraordinary practice and execution and systems and networks of people to ensure you succeed. And I think on that, you're absolutely aligned, that it isn't just about talent. Talented people fail all the time, but it is attitudinal. It is about this urgency, and it is about the absolute focus that is required to get into and be a minority of people who make it successfully into that tail.
Absolutely. I think you put it so articulately. But I'll point out one thing that I did some thinking after that launch. When you think about sport, you got to have talent to be a great table tennis player, or, look what happened in the FIFA World Cup. The talent on this, it's remarkable, right? But sport is a sequential process. You've got to get better. And, you with me? You eat better, you sleep better, so your times go down. If a marathon runner, you get these new shoes it's sequential. Life isn't. Life is a network. Get something right in the tail and it changes everything. So sport is a sequential process, whereas business, I would argue, in leadership is a very different thing. It's determined in the tail. So they are comparable in some ways, but they aren't in others. And that's why business and life is easier. Sport is sequential. I remember, I think it was the Ineos team in the Tour de France. He won by this incremental, you ever heard his speech of David Brailsford? They fixed 1% here, 1% there, because those things are additive. In a business, if you're doing those small things well, you're incremental, but someone comes from left field with a new business model, you are gone because they're in the tail. So it's an important issue. It's a wonderful conclusion, because you don't need sequential brilliance. You need to be in the tail. And I think that being a CEO, you've got to be in the tail. CEOs in the rump are incrementalists. CEOs have got to be in the tail. Innovation has got to be in the tail. Innovation in the rump is incrementalism. Question is, to your point, how do you get to the tail?
I did laugh out loud at the first time louder than others, and then smiled to myself when you mentioned it several times, about here is a guy who's absolutely obsessed on time. Here's a guy who is absolutely obsessed on performance. Here's a guy who between meetings takes calls up and down the stairs of the Discovery building, who baths. Now, bathing to me seems like a luxury. And yet, it's like, hold on a second, this is a contradiction to the vigor and energy of Adrian Gore. Explain the bath thing to me, please. Put me out of my misery.
I mean, I actually do it quite at a specific time, but for me, it's a time to read and learn. I find it very therapeutic. I find it takes out the edge of having to be on the move. And for me, it's a space where I can absorb. And amazing things happen in the bath. So it does sound odd. And we said, we called the epiphany in the bath, and there's been all kinds of jokes about it. But for me, I think all of us have different ways of getting to that special time, where you learn. For me, that's how it is.
Where you have your eureka moments, I suppose.
Yes. And you made the point about, is it retrofitted? It isn't retrofitted, but now I can observe it. You with me? I've done the science and work to understand how they work, and I kind of know getting in that tail, you got to turn yourself inside out. You're making a speech summary. You've got a product to develop. You've got an idea. You've got to line that bath and go through pain to stretch yourself into the tail. Those things like, enough is enough. Let's be realistic. That's all things that are bad for the tail. You've got to turn yourself inside out. And it's worth it. It's wonderful.
I started off by asking you, what does it take to be a CEO? And you eventually explained it with absolute clarity. I wonder what it means to be a CEO. What does it mean to you to be at the helm of an organization that employs directly 15,000 people, that impacts, I forget how many million lives around the world across 40 different life companies who use the Vitality program? The exponentiality of Discovery is well documented. But what does it mean to you to be a CEO?
Listen, I'm grateful for it. I hope it doesn't sound trite. You know, I'm trying to say to you, I'm doing a job like anyone else here. I have the same difficulties and deadlines. It's a highly, highly pressurized job, but it is deeply meaningful to your specific question. What does it mean? I find it very meaningful. Our purpose of making people healthier, building something at scale, means the world to me. And as a CEO, I have agency. I mean, maybe that's, thinking aloud, Bruce, that's one of the, how can I say, blessings of being a CEO, is a real sense of agency. A sense that, ultimately you can make an impact. And hopefully you build a business where everyone feels that. But I feel it in a very pure way. I think a great organization gives people that sense of agency. I think I started my career in Liberty Life in those days. I think that was my spark. I felt I could make a difference. So a CEO, I think, it is a privilege, but I think the responsibility to make that difference, you need to feel, that's the real meaning of it.
And the responsibility to ensure that it continues beyond you, because even you at some point are going to step back from your responsibilities at Discovery. And I wonder if you look back at those days at Liberty and reflect on it, because Liberty was the big gorilla. Donald Gordon was this great visionary legend who'd introduced unit trusts to South Africa, who had this giant of an insurance business. And he eventually stepped away from Liberty, then created Liberty International, which in its own right for a period of time was successful. But it never felt quite the same after he was gone. And I suppose one of the greatest duties of particularly the founder CEO is ensuring that the tail persists and the tail extends, I guess.
I mean, I think there's no science to this issue. But my sense is that I think if you have a command and control organization and the leadership leaves, you're left behind with people that don't have that sense of agency, that own and manage a culture. I mean, I think at Discovery, we've worked hard. And, you've observed us for many years. There are people in the organization. Firstly, the culture is one of where people feel, hopefully, a sense of agency and the ability to drive the purpose. And I think because of that, it's purpose and values driven and egalitarian, that there's factually people that can do this job that I'm doing. They'll do it differently, but we are not a command and control structure that when the head is cut off or the head leaves, it goes through any kind of crisis. So I'm very confident of the continuity of the excellence. It will be different, but it will be excellent. And that I think ultimately is a true test of a leader, that succession, truthfully.
That's Adrian Gore, the founder of Discovery, still in charge after 36 years. Well, it's natural to fear the future. We're wired that way. It takes a far higher level of intellectual rigor to seek out positive signals and act on those to grow. You've got less time than you think to have impact. You need to inject urgency into your plans and act on those. Then tell others what you're planning to do. Declaring your goals gives you something to lose. Announce it, and then do it. And even if you come up short, you would have learned new skills, and if the goal was big enough, your life will never be the same, in a good way, again. And finally, just a few of the millions of decisions you take in your lifetime will have an outsized impact on your life. You will make them better if you've got disciplined optimism, seeking positive signals, you act speedily, and declare your plans openly. Those are the principles that work for Adrian Gore. They could work for you. Yeah, it's scary, but nothing worthwhile ever came easily. This episode of So You Think You Want to Be a CEO is powered by Discovery Bank. Discovery Bank is an authorized FSP 48657. T's and C's apply.